Chip, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
So I want to start by asking, obviously, about the protests, not only this last weekend, but the previous few weeks, the protests against police brutality for Black Lives Matter. Before going into its effect on your company and on corporate America, I'd like to ask you, what has been your personal emotional reaction to these protests?
It's been, I guess I'm really sad about where we are as a country. I've been horrified, just like everybody else who's watched the videos. I've got a young daughter who's 12 years old, and we spent a lot of time talking about racial injustices, social injustices. And, you know, I've really struggled with this. It's been really, really tough to see that we really haven't made the progress that maybe many of us thought had been made over the last couple of decades, that there is this systemic racism in our country that has to be abolished. And I'm really sad about where we are as a country, and I am, as a leader, I am personally committed to trying to make a huge difference.
Do you have a strong feeling about why protests of this scale are happening now? You know, given what you said, which is that we're clearly dealing with an issue that isn't a few weeks old, a few years old, even a few decades old. This is a centuries-long issue. Do you have an idea about why this moment, you know, George Floyd's death and other instances of police violence are hitting so strongly, not just you and your family, but people across the country, really around the world right now?
Well, I think it's probably not just George Floyd's death. I think it's the aggregation or the culmination of the number of incidents that have happened just over the past couple of months. And then you put that together with the COVID-19, the economy, people being sheltered in place for months and months. And I think it created almost a perfect powder keg. And the impact of social media obviously plays a big role here. I mean, my daughter has watched the murder of George Floyd on her iPad over and over. She was the one who told me it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And she's not even 12 years old at this point in time. So, you know, I think it is the combination of those. It's the perfect confluence of multiple things all coming together. But you know, having the media now that everybody can see these incidents, the incident in Central Park as well, which was also horrific. Nobody died, nobody got arrested, but it was just horrible. And it makes you realize that in a world where there wasn't social media, Mr. Cooper would have wound up probably at Rikers Island, charged with a crime that he had never committed. And it really does highlight just the systemic racism that exists in this country that I believe we need to deal with.
Yeah. You released a statement where you said, we at LS & Co. are far from perfect. We have a lot of work to do internally and externally to live up to the ideals we cherish as a company. That includes continuing to listen to Black employees when they speak about their experiences at our offices, with our businesses, and in our country. How do you ensure that these aren't just the right words, but they're the right words met with corporate behaviors and corporate changes that make Black lives better, both within your company, among your consumer base, and truly, I suppose, throughout the world? You are a global enterprise.
Yeah, listening is super important, but actions are also important. And part of what's made the last couple of weeks difficult is it has forced me to look kind of at our own house, and our own house is not completely in order. There's a lot for us to be proud of, though. We have a long legacy of standing up for social justice and for equal rights. We desegregated our factories 10 years before it was the law of the lands in this country, when we had factories here in this country. And we have, as I said, a long history of standing up for equal rights, whether it's racial rights, gender rights, LGBTQ rights. You know, we have a long track record there. And even our actions over the past couple of years whether it's through our foundation, the Levi Strauss Foundation, or some of the actions that we've taken as a company, have really been focused on the Black and Brown communities, particularly around where we live and work here in the Bay Area, but also on a national basis. A number of our big focal areas over the last couple of years have been gun violence prevention, which disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. We've not just actioned against it by trying to influence legislation, but we've put our money where our mouth is, committing $1 million to different organizations that are focused on ending gun violence prevention. During the midterm elections, I'm actually wearing the t-shirt, we focused on getting out the vote. I mean, one of the big actions that I hope comes from all this, aside from the protests, if the number of people that have gone out and protested actually go out and vote at election time, maybe we can start making real change here. The biggest opportunity we have as a democracy is to get people out to hold leaders accountable, and not just leaders at the national level, which always seems to get the attention, but leaders at the local level who are controlling the police organizations, who have a lot a big role to play in determining where city dollars or county dollars or state dollars are being committed, how much are going to social justice organizations. The biggest opportunity we as citizens have is to hold those leaders accountable. So we're very, very committed to the vote again this year. We were very active in the midterm elections, and we're going at it again big time this year with the presidential elections. But it really does come down to not just listening, and we've done a lot of listening here lately, but also really acting and putting action into place.
So you mentioned policy changes that you instituted before desegregation. You mentioned ongoing policy positions that you have, like a sort of a pro-voting posture. Are there policies not yet on the books, so to speak, that you are starting to talk about with corporate leadership or the board that you think it's now time to take this new step, given the protests, given new things that you've learned from, as you've said, listening? Is there a new policy that you are prepared to tell us that you're thinking about initiating?
Well, we're looking at a range of different options. In fact, later today, I've got a meeting with my executive team, and we're meeting with some of the leaders of the Onyx Employee Resource Group, which is the Black Employee Resource Group, to talk about different actions that we can take. I mean, it starts by, looking at our own house again, as I said, so setting some specific targets in place regarding moving more Black leaders into leadership positions. That's going to be really, really important. As a company, we have about 19% of our employees here in the US are Black, but that includes our retail stores and our distribution centers. If you look at just our management headcount, it's only 5%, and against a 13% representation, that's not acceptable. So what are we going to do to fill the pipeline? We started recruiting at historically Black colleges and universities about a year ago and had several successful interns last year. So building the pipeline, but also committing and setting targets for leadership positions held by Blacks. We also are going to take a look at what can we do to influence our suppliers, our partners, our business partners, and should we be setting specific goals there? Should we have a target number of suppliers who are owned by Black or Brown business leaders? These are the kind of things that we're talking about right now. We have not landed anything. And then the final thing is adding a Black person to our board of directors is something that is on the horizon. We're not there right now, but it is something that we're very committed to.
Okay, moving from this to the public health crisis, I have a couple questions about how you see the retail environment evolving, and we only have about 5-6 minutes left. So why don't you first quickly appraise me of what your company has done in response to the pandemic, what the furloughs have looked like, and just what your response to the last 2 months has essentially been.
Yeah, so first and foremost, we put employee safety above everything else. That is super critical to us. So we closed all of our stores. We have about 220 stores here in the US. We closed all of our stores before we were required to by any city, state, or county government authority or regulatory authority. So we closed our stores, I think the date was March 15th. We paid all of our hourly employees through the end of March. At that point in time, it looks naive now, but we said we were closing our stores until the end of March. Many stores are still closed today. And then we extended that in April and continued to pay our hourly workers until the CARES Act came into effect in the middle of April. At that point, we furloughed our hourly employees, which was about 4,500 employees. And I had a couple of sleepless nights about that. But we had done an analysis that with the CARES Act, the government top-up kept our hourly employees whole. In fact, many of them made more money on unemployment than they did working for us on an hourly basis.
That's a $600 per week
right,
top.
the top-up, right.
Unemployment.
Now we've started to reopen our stores. And again, the first and foremost priority is health and safety of our employees. So we have about 40% of our stores open at this point. I think it's 87 stores. It would have been 107, but we had 20 stores closed because of the protests over the weekend. All of our employees have masks. We've dramatically increased sanitization inside of our stores. We're executing social distancing. In fact, a number of our stores had lines out the door because we had to limit the number of people that could come in and shop. What we're seeing is consumers are coming in determined to shop. They have something they want to buy. They're not coming in to browse. They're coming in, doing their purchase. So conversion is very, very high. Actually, units per purchase is higher than normal. People are in and out pretty quickly. And the business is not where it was prior to COVID. I think that's to be expected. You know, we're a big global company, so we have a preview of what to expect from what we've seen in China, where we've now been open for over 2 months. And there we do have stores that are comping positively. But I think it's fair to say that the pandemic is dramatically going to change the shape of retail. It's going to change the retail landscape here in the US pretty dramatically, I believe. And it's probably going to change consumer behavior, at least until the time that there's a vaccine. And we're going to see fewer people coming into the store, buy online, pick up in store, or buy online and pick up curbside, which we're offering at over 125 stores right now, is going to become much more of a common factor. I also think e-commerce, a lot of people have shifted to e-commerce. I think that's going to be sticky. I think a lot of people aren't going to go back. I've been buying all my groceries online. I don't know if I'm ever going to go to a grocery store again. And so consumer behavior is going to be dramatically impacted here. And I think the economy is going to come into play too.
Right. Last question for you. I have a prediction question about the near future of retail. One thing that I saw in my research is that, the share of total e-commerce the share of total retail that is online had been increasing by about 1 percentage point per year. It was up to about 15% by some measures in January, jumped to 25% in April and May. So you've essentially compressed 10 years of expected e-commerce growth into a matter of about 6 weeks. You look at that, say, that acceleration of 10 years, if that's 10% of your business, then it might potentially mean that you don't need 10% of your stores, right? That there's a mathematical equation that would say that 22 of your 220 stores that you told me about just might not need to exist if you have that kind of online acceleration. How sticky do you think this e-commerce acceleration is, and how might you have to respond to consumers essentially zipping in a time machine to 2030 in the middle of 2020?
So I think the observation is right on, Bergh. I've been saying all along that this is compressing what would have taken 10 years into just a couple of months. And e-commerce is one indicator of that. There are many, though. The number of bankruptcies, some of those companies would have gone bankrupt anyway. It might have taken a lot longer. I think it's going to be very sticky. I think it'll depend by category and by business. Like I said, I don't know if I'm ever going to go to a grocery store again. I'm hooked. I'm going to buy online all the time. And I think for apparel, a lot of consumers still want to go into a store and try things on. So I think it's fair to say that brick and mortar will continue to be an important part of our business on a go-forward basis. I do think the crisis creates an opportunity for us to upgrade locations, renegotiate leases, and find better locations for our stores, because I do think brick and mortar will continue to be important. But e-commerce is here to stay. We're doubling down on our e-commerce business, which has been the fastest growing part of our business now for several years. We've built good capabilities, and we just need to keep going on that because it is going to continue to be increasingly more important as we go forward.
Yeah, really interesting point that I think I'm going to take away from this is the idea that people had always been browsing a little bit online, a little bit offline, but you say that you're finding essentially that people are coming into the store with a much clearer sense of what they want. They're walking in, they're saying, I want that, that, and that, putting it in a bag, leaving, because they've already done their homework online on their phones and laptops.
Yeah, the e-commerce site is always the first port of call for a consumer.
Right, right. All right, that's all we have time for. Chip, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Derek.